Here is Donald Trump and George Stephanopoulos. And here's Donald Trump. I had a little conversation with a buddy of mine last night, and he's like, I don't think the Woodward tapes mean anything. And it's possible. It's not an unreasonable assessment, but it is the reality is it has chewed up amount of time. It is just less time that Donald Trump has to try and suppress, again, politically, not mechanically, Joe Biden's votes every moment that he has to do that. Now, we also have data that shows that his support on COVID, at the very least, has dropped in the wake of these things. So I suspect that it actually has meant something. But in this era, who knows what means anything? But here's George Stephanopoulos and Donald Trump at the town hall last night, minus the town, talking about coronavirus and the increasing amounts of death that we are experiencing.
So I feel that we've done a tremendous job, actually, and it's something that I don't think it's been recognized like it should. But when you look at our testing, when you look at our swabs, when you look at our ventilators, when you look at what we've done with hospitals, and we've made a lot of governors look very good. And now some are in a shutdown and some aren't. We'd like to see it open up and open up as soon as possible. But we're very proud of the job we've done, and we've saved a lot of lives, a tremendous number of lives.
Mr. President, you mentioned a number of things. So let's talk about the mortality first, because you said we're doing better in mortality than other countries. But here's this chart right here. It shows the United States is right here. This is number of deaths per million residents. Here's Western Europe here, Canada, way down there. We're not at the top of the list.
The excess mortality rate is among the best in the whole world, George. I mean, I can show you. There's a chart that just came out a little while ago.
Right.
Excess mortality rate is compared to Europe, compared to other places, it's about 25% better. In one case, it's over 60% better. And we also have a very big country. We're talking about a lot bigger than most countries. When you look at testing, just as an example, when India does 40 million less tests than us, they have 1.5 billion people. China, you don't get the accurate numbers out of China, but China, they lost a lot of people. They just don't say what they lost.
We have 4% of the world's population, more than 20% of the cases, more than 20% of the deaths.
Well, we have 20% of the cases because of the fact that we do much more testing. If we wouldn't do testing, you wouldn't have cases. You would have very few cases.
As you know, Fauci says most of these are actual cases.
Well, Dr. Fauci said we've done a fantastic job. He just...
Oh, now he's talking about Fauci. He doesn't address the fact that we also coincidentally have 20% more deaths. Now, how is that manufactured? And when he's talking about excess mortality, I would love to see those charts, because excess mortality, the fact that we're beating people by 25 or 60% on that, I mean, it's hard to know what he's talking about, but that sounds like not a good thing. Like excess mortality, to the extent that I understand it, and it's hard to know what he's talking about here, would be a chart that compares March, let's say 2019 to September 2019 to March 2020 and September 2020. And you could assess how many more deaths did we have during that 6-month period versus the year over year numbers, essentially. And then you would go back to 2018, you go back to 2017, 2016, and there's a pattern, right? We have the number of deaths we have each year in the United States is fairly static. At certain, you could chop it up in terms of localities, you can chop it up in terms of time periods. But it's fairly relatively static. When you have a big year over year jump in mortality rates, it begs the question, why is that? When you're in the midst of a deadly pandemic, the answer is pretty obvious. It's probably the pandemic. And if we have better mortality excess mortality rates than other countries, that's a bad thing.
Oh, well, don't forget all the deaths of despair from the people who were forced to practice social distancing or wear a mask. You know, those count too. Those are in the Democrat side.
Those would count in excess deaths, wouldn't they?
They would. I mean, what you wouldn't be able to do is you wouldn't be able to disaggregate, you know, like, okay, maybe suicides have gone up in this instance. We don't know that, but it's conceivable. At the same time, car accidents probably would drop in that same 6-month period because people were not traveling at all for the, March, April, May. They weren't driving as much.
Yeah.
So
deaths from the normal flu too, I imagine, would drop in this scenario.
That's correct. I would assume.
Our World in Data has some excess mortality numbers here. And if you look at the United States, you can see the UK has a massive spike here, but they got it down. That's, a sign of a smaller population in the US. We are consistently crushing other people. I mean, recently, I guess, I don't know what's going on with this recent data, but over the course of this entire pandemic, we've been basically the one most consistently above everybody else.
So we're winning.
Yeah, it's not good though.
It's just the wrong
Number one,
race.
baby.
We're just winning the wrong race.
We're winning the population control race in this country.
You know, to be fair, I don't think we can 100% trust the numbers coming out of China, but I distrust the numbers coming out of the Trump White House more.
I think we should absolutely be skeptical of the number of people who died in China. However, we also know that they seem to be pretty confidently opening up. So whatever their timeline is, I think we can be assured of. How many died in that moment? It's hard to know. And now, of course, they could lock down in a far more efficient way than we could. But really, the issue is, look at Canada. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a